Hello and welcome to the Car Care channel, and welcome to this 2020 Toyota Tacoma. Initially you look at this Tacoma and yeah, it has all the garnish in the front and everything, but it's just a normal Tacoma. But folks, when I tell you the story of this Tacoma and where it has been, it is simply, to me at least, one of the coolest Tacomas you will see, and it carries a very important message. Less is more. Let's get in the video and you'll find out what I mean. So let me tell you the story of this truck. So everything that we're going to check out on this truck is going to start to make sense. So this started out as a normal stock Tacoma truck, I think TRD Sport package or something like that. But manual transmission, which is very cool. No smart key, not really heavily low options or whatnot. The owner bought it for the intention of overlanding. And let me just say one thing about overlanding. In my opinion, as a professional, as a professional mechanic, I look at this and I see a lot of overlanding trucks that show up in the shop, and we're dealing with all these struggles of the modifications, them getting in the way, and things not lasting and all that. And the most off-roading this truck will do is going over the curb at Costco to get your favorite groceries and back home, and that's about it. That's the God honest truth, folks. Overlanding have become kind of a fashion, or how should I say it, a trend. Now some folks really enjoy overlanding, and they do it. Basically, you go out in the wilderness, spend the day, enjoy the nature responsibly, safely, and then come back to civilization, I suppose. But the problem is, it became more of a show. People actually don't do overlanding. They just build their trucks like overlanding, spend unbelievable amounts of money, ruining sometimes, because some of these modifications, if you have no purpose for them and you're just going to drive this car on the street, you actually ruined your car, because you don't need this giant tires, you don't need this lift kit that's going to overload everything in the suspension and everything, just for the sake of being cool. But the owner of this truck is the furthest away from that. Every single modification here have been very carefully thought out of, because this truck did not just go to, local overlanding, let's call it Moab, some of the national parks, some of the cool spots around the US. This truck has been around the world, and it literally just came back from a giant trip all across Europe and a very long stay in Morocco, where it spent 2 months in Morocco in the literal middle of nowhere. If you are not familiar with that, the literal middle of nowhere is called the Sahara. And they went 5 days at a time without replacement, without really seeing any living being. They survived in this truck. That is overlanding to the next level. And the best part is, the preparation for this truck from the moment it was bought was for this purpose. So every single modification that we're going to check out on this car has an exact purpose of going very, very remote areas in the literal middle of nowhere, not in the US, outside, all over the world, and make it back safely, reliably, and well. And that is really the coolest thing about this truck. Let me share with you some of the photos that the owner shared with me here. There's just, you don't see that in most of your overlanding trucks going places like this. You can do that in the US, and there's nothing wrong with that. But this truck is truly special because it's been around the world. Let us check it out, and you'll see what little was done to this, actually, to prep it for these extremely daring trips. Personally, I would never do trips like that because I just don't trust myself to be prepped enough. Let's check it out. Let's take a tour around this truck, and then we'll look under the hood, we'll lift it up, we'll check it out, we'll talk about what you did to it. First thing is, when it comes to off-roading stuff, ARB is a company that's going to come on your radar. They're an Australian company, and if you want to learn a thing or two about off-roading and extreme off-roading, talk to the Australians. They know a lot about off-roading, and so are the companies from Australia. A lot of stuff in this car come from Australian companies, starting with this giant bumper. Normally, you don't need this. If you do any light off-roading, any of the national parks, all that, you actually don't need a bumper. If you're careful, But the kind of off-roading this truck is doing, and not only the bumper, because behind here, there's a 12,000-pound winch. And you really need this if you're going off-roading in remote areas with no other people around you, because if you get stuck, this might save you. And if there's no cars around, there's nobody, you're in the middle of nowhere, you will need those. The other thing is these lights. Again, you're in the middle of nowhere, you really need to see, although this car has really good LEDs, but you need all the lights you get. But you notice there's nothing at the top. And this is the biggest thing that I see off-roading communities do. They put these giant lights at the top. Let's blind everybody. This is all you need. It's a small thing. The winch, though, is very important. Then we wrap around the side. This is basically a stock side. Yes, it's lifted. I think it's a 2-inch lift. We'll talk about that when we lift it up and look at it. But these are TRD wheels. We don't need some special studded or that has the giant guard here. No, they're just normal wheels. They're just wheels. If it gets scratched, well, it's going to be okay. And these are General Grabber AT tires. Not sure on the size, but it's not excessive. I've seen trucks here that come in with twice the size, and it's like, I don't see nothing. It's never been off-roading. That's all you need. Going around the side, this truck does have a rock slider for protection. It is off of it right now for weight reduction because they don't want to be driving on the road with all this weight. And then we have this little XP. Folks, this is Southeast Toyota, I think they're called, stuff. This is not Toyota. This is like packages in certain areas. Then we look at this Canopy. There's a lot going on here. So let's open all of these. We're going to talk about some of the things that are here. Oop, gotta open this first. This Canopy is called Elu Cab. Don't quote me here, it's the name of that company. Very high, actually I don't see a lot of these. Usually you get the cabs, they're just for fun, for coverage and whatnot, but this one's really cool, really high quality. But the biggest thing is we have ARP drawers. And if you're gonna go in the middle of nowhere, you need to be really smart about what you bring with you. I have parts, lots of car parts. Actually, I see a belt tensioner. I think this is a tie rod, and he usually carries axles. I've talked with the owner. Basically, if you're going off-roading, you're not going to be rebuilding an engine or replacing a transmission in the side of the desert there. It's usually stuff like a drive belt that broke, tensioner that decided to go, idler, not even a water pump. I mean, you're not going to be replacing a water pump in the middle of nowhere. That's just not going to happen. But usually stuff that breaks in off-roading, and I'll run through some of them. I am by no shape or form an off-roading expert, but as a technician, I see this stuff. Axles, front axles on these. You need to carry an axle. And the best part is, most of these trucks, the front axles are the same. So you only carry one. And shocks. You actually do need to carry rear shocks. They love to break on these. So little stuff. You're not going to carry a spare engine in the back because remember, you're going to live here for a while. Speaking of that, they have, I don't think it is here, but there's like a toilet, there's a shower, there's a little tent. And I'll show you this picture. It looks like it is up. And then they have a fridge that goes here. I believe the fridge goes here. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not into this stuff. But then there's another drawer, which to me looks like the kitchen because this is a perfect stainless steel surface. And here's where you're going to make your meals. But other than that, other than this stuff, there isn't a lot more. There's something very cool right here. And I kind of wonder about it. I want you guys to also, if you are into the off-roading, real off-roading stuff, this is a filter. Like you see this filter right here? There's actually 2 fans right here. So we're actually talking about this and wondering, is this to keep the load off the refrigerator? Write a comment below if you actually know what this exactly does. I see a lot of lights. I think these are inverters of some kind, probably to power the fridge and all this stuff. We'll look a little bit more under the hood. And then you go around, there is one of these little fire extinguishers. And you just tell the kind of dirt that it has is not your average off-roading dirt. And you'll see underneath it, it's like sand that is not normally, I don't normally see sand like this on cars we get here that are off-roading. This is very cool. Do you notice it's not overdone? There is not, like I closed this canopy and you look at this truck with the canopy closed, you actually don't think that it's the kind of truck that you're actually gonna go seriously remote off-roading with. It just looks normal, a little canopy and a little bumper. That's actually all you need, folks. These trucks, they are off-road ready from the factory. And that's the biggest thing. I see people going overboard with their overland builds and off-road builds. Here's an advice from a mechanic and from many people who actually off-road their trucks. Take it off-road stock. If it works for what you needed, why are you spending the money just to look cool? It does absolutely nothing. Less is more. This truck, we're going to look at the ball joint in the front, has a problem with aftermarket ball joints, but if he didn't need a little bit of more ground clearance, he would have loved to keep the originals and he wouldn't have any issues with them. But now you're stuck with aftermarket stuff that just keeps going and going because you can't use the originals. Less is more, folks. Test your trucks first before you go off-roading and then modify accordingly as you need. If you don't need it, why are we spending the money and kind of destroying the truck in a way? And before we look under the hood, let me show you some of these stickers, which are pretty cool. The biggest one being, that's a sticker you don't see every day on off-road trucks, in the US at least. But I can buy this sticker off of eBay. This car actually have pictures of it in Morocco, which is very cool to have a US truck go all the way across the pond, where I somewhat come from. It's close to that area, but let's look at the interior before we look at the hood. So this is, to me, is my favorite part. I've been in off-roading truck, and usually they have all this stuff inside. Look at this one. I love it. There's actually nothing changed here. It's a manual transmission Tacoma, which is the obvious choice if you're gonna do this kind of trips. And everything else is just the way it came out of the factory. Nothing, because that's all you need. You don't really need 10 different things. I think this is a GPS. I'm not sure, it looks like a phone to me, but again, I'm not the off-roading expert here. Back seats, just normal. He did mention, the owner of the truck, that they put water tanks here. They fold the seats and they put the water tanks there. These are for, I think, the toilet and the shower. Speaking of the shower, let's look under the hood, because there's actually a lot going on under the hood in this thing, because all of these additional stuff need to be wired up. It's very busy underneath here, and there's a lot going on. So here's the interesting thing. First, this is a shower system. Not really familiar how this works, but this is a shower system. Some of these hoses run underneath the truck all the way to the back. Battery is a much heavier duty battery. And then engine, completely stock. You notice there's no snorkel, there is nothing. K&N filter, and the owner actually already told me that they regretted that. They wish they could just carry regular filters, because they had an incident in Morocco where they stopped by for some service and they didn't know what to do with this, and they actually cleaned it the wrong way and it caused some issues. So they're actually gonna get rid of the K&N. They're just gonna use regular filters and carry filters with them, or clean them as they go, because things will get dirty. Right next to it is an ARB air compressor, for obvious reasons, for your air up and air down. You do need that. That's actually very important to have a compressor if you're going kind of off the grid. Everything else, engine itself, 100% stock. You notice there's no giant snorkel because we are not going in water. In the Sahara Desert, there's no water, in case you didn't know that. Other stuff here. This is actually a very cool addition here. So this takes engine coolant and it takes it to an exchanger, heat exchanger, so you can warm things up that you need to warm up. It uses the heat from the engine. If you need to warm something up or keep something warm a little bit, you can actually use the heat of the coolant in that other heat exchanger. And I thought that was pretty cool. And all they did was they didn't chop everything and do all that. They just took the radiator hoses and they looped them here. You have two valves. You can close the valves when you don't need it, so you're not wasting your heat out, or you can open them when you do. That is actually pretty cool. I can imagine living in kind of the middle of nowhere. You will start to need sources of heat. In case you're not familiar, if you go in the middle of a desert, and I remember this from back home, it's very hot in the middle of, during the day, but it gets very cold at night. Consider when you change from 100 degrees all the way down to 50, that's quite a change. You're going to feel it extremely cold, so you do need some sources, additional sources of heat. You already have an engine, you already have the coolant that is hot. This is truly a privilege to see this. It's done very well, folks. You see a lot of wires running around, but it's done extremely well, and I can tell just by looking. I've seen a lot of modifications here, and when I see this is done well. Everything is fused everywhere. Everything you notice is running with the wire harness of the car. You don't see stuff just laying around here. Everything is running with the wire harness of the car, and that's how it should be done. Now, this truck came here for a checkup because it is going on its next trip. Beginning of 2024, they are going to Africa, back to Africa. I think he says Botswana and Namibia, something like that. And then they also plan their own Alaska, Canada trip. So now we're going to switch from sand to possibly snow and deep snow. And what also brought this truck to the shop is it needs a clutch. It's not slipping or anything. By the way, this truck has 42,000 miles. It's not slipping or anything, but they have some like vibration when you take off, and it just doesn't feel as healthy. And remember, this is not a truck you're driving on the street normally. They're taking in really remote areas, and in my opinion, they're making the right decision. Let's look at that clutch. Again, this is 42,000 miles. This clutch have seen better days. It looks fine on possibly on camera. It looks like it has everything, but we're actually getting close to some of the rivets. And that's usually how clutches start to go. Like if you look at this one, getting pretty close there. And the whole thing looks like it's, how should I say it? Burned up. That's, I guess, is the word. And the reason for that is, would you look here? Of course, this is an off-roading truck. You're going to see this a lot. You're going to see the burn marks and even some chatter. And actually, it's grinding at some points. And this is a flywheel, this is a pressure plate, because you're not familiar with this stuff. Basically, this is the engine, in case you haven't seen a clutch. This is the actual clutch itself, which is backwards. This is the pressure plate. When you bolt this down, this part actually pushes the clutch down, and now they're connected. When you want to disengage the clutch, or this style clutch, you're going to use the throwout bearing to press this down. When you press this down, it's going to actually pull this back, and it's going to let this freewheel, and now you can change gears, and we keep going. That's how clutch works in 2 minutes. Now what presses on this is the slave cylinder and the master cylinder. That's hydraulic pressure that pushes on this. But back to this clutch. Normally when you do a clutch, you have to replace a pressure plate. Not for this. You can machine this and it'll be fine. But the spring weakens over time that disengages and engages it. The clutch, this is basically a glorified brake pad. It's friction material. It wears down. It starts slipping. You replace it and we're back to square one. The flywheel, on the other hand, Normally, you would resurface this and we're good. Kind of like a rotor, but this is the much, and this is an extremely heavy thing. And this is the ring where the starter would turn the engine from. But in the case of this truck, I talked to the owner. I'm like, this does have some burn marks. They could be heat marks. We have to machine it and see what happens. Their answer was, no, we're not going to see what happens. I know this when I have a new flywheel, new clutch, new throwout bearings from the factory. It lasted 42,000 miles. And not when it broke or went away is when I started having signs of issues. I don't want to risk it. So they actually got a new flywheel. Pretty expensive flywheel. Very expensive flywheel, by the way. They did not want any modifications here because, again, this is a purposeful truck. And their logic is 100% correct. If this clutch got us through all these situations for 42,000 miles, I think if we replace it with the same clutch, we anticipate another 42,000 miles out of it. And that is very correct logic with the original parts, folks. So having said that, let's put this truck on the lift. Let's check it out because there are some other very interesting modifications underneath it that you'll see. Let's take a look underneath here. The first thing is this massive bumper that extends all the way here, and you have a proper recovery point right here. You notice something is missing. This truck actually has this front sway bar removed to give the maximum articulation. It does make it a little wobbly when you drive it, but it's not terrible. Again, this is purpose built for that. Here's where the bushing would go. And then you have the opening with the sway bar link right here. That's been removed completely. Now, the lower control arm is 100% original on this. Original ball joint, it's been through all that. The shocks are old man Emu shocks. Supposedly these are really good. You know me, if you watch my channel, I don't like aftermarket stuff. But you have to in order to get the lift. And then the upper control arm is also aftermarket. This side has a little bit of play on the upper ball joint. They're actually going to get it taken care of by the person who installed these modifications because they have some kind of warranty or whatnot. But we did put grease in them. They have grease fittings. They do get a little better. Folks, every time you see a ball joint with grease fitting, bad idea. I know people assume that, well, if you put grease in them, you're going to regularly grease them. That's not the case because the original ones last forever and they don't have a grease fitting. The grease is not going to go anywhere. It's just going to stay there contained, and you don't need to re-add grease to it. You do have one of these quick oil change, like oil drain plug things. I don't like these normally. You notice this one has a little bit of wetness around it. Everybody says these never leak. They're the greatest. Bolt never leaks too. That's just the way I see it. Axles are actually original. And that's the interesting part. Usually when you lift these and you have these wild angles on these axles, they start going. But these are original and they don't have any issues. Front diff is original here. And this is the beautiful manual transmission, which we just had out not too long ago. Very simple job on these actually. They're not extremely complicated to pull this. It's actually very simple on this. Transfer case is original. Everything pretty much is original. And you notice the general color here is not a color you normally see underneath trucks. This is like desert sand. It just has a different feel to it, and it was everywhere around the transmission. That's probably the biggest thing we had to work with was that. Not really rust. We're used to rusty stuff. This sand was very interesting. It gets on your skin. It just takes a minute for you to adapt and get used to it. But you notice there is like some additional harnesses running. There's some hoses going to the back. The harness, I think, runs on this side. I like whoever did this because they ran the harness alongside the frame. You see some of the cooler stuff right here. And some of the hoses that run through here, they go inside the body. They also run on the other side. It's a very clean install. I usually see people run wires right here, which is the worst place. You always run wires where there's wires. There's the frame wire right here, and on the other side as well. You can see some of it here. That's the frame wire. If you're gonna run wires, run them alongside this. That's the safest place. But the biggest thing here is this is a beautiful 32-gallon fuel tank. an absolute must if you are going to do trips like this. So look at this massive behemoth. It's so well made. Just look at these walls. This is actually made by an Australian company. If I could gather this information later on the names of these companies, I'll put them from the owner. But if you look here, this is my favorite part. You have a little protrusion here, and it's high to give space for the drive shaft. That is pretty cool. This whole fuel tank is really cool. Now the rear leaf springs, they don't appear original. I think these are upgraded heavy duty leaf springs. This is one of the coolest things about Tacoma. They still have leaf springs. Well, potentially not anymore, but old man emu shocks in the back as well. These are supposed to be some of the best. Again, you know my opinion on those. All original otherwise. Rear end's original. Everything else is. The spare tire is actually upgraded to the same size as the regular tires, because you do need that. You don't want to have a flat tire and now you're driving a smaller one. That wouldn't work. What a beautiful truck this is. And the biggest thing is this comes to us from Florida, so they don't have rust over there. But this color and this appearance, I don't see it a lot on trucks. And that says a lot about the whole overlanding thing. Basically, when I get trucks here, they're all lifted and modified and all that. And I look underneath them and they look cleaner than my city-driven Camry. We need to have a talk, because if we're going to do all these modifications, they need to be purposeful. They don't need to be just for show, because you really, I mean, there's a lot of compromises with driving this truck on the road with no sway bar in the front, with these big tires and everything else, and gas fill-ups are very expensive because you have a huge fuel tank. You don't need these modifications if you're really not going to do what the owner of this truck does, for example. And lastly, you notice this truck is like wide open. There's no covers here. There's nothing. There is actually a massive ARB cover, which we left off intentionally because we're going to film this video for you guys, for you to see kind of the intricate stuff of this truck. But that cover is going in next as soon as we finish filming here, because this truck is actually ready to go. They're picking it up tomorrow. So there you have it, folks. Less is more when it comes to true overlanding. Not the type you do at Costco. You know what I mean. Folks, this truck is, other than the ball joints that we talked about, it is ready for the next trip. I think they picked a good car for their expedition. The main thing that the owner actually mentioned and talked about, taking this particular one out of the US into, you know, other areas of the world, particularly third world countries where sometimes parts availability is a problem. I come from a third world country. I remember how it was. You don't just pop up to your Advanced Auto Parts and buy some parts on the fly and let's just put them in the car and let's move on. That's not how this works. You just don't have parts. And if you take a car that nobody's familiar with, that's it. Nobody's going to fix it for you. While if this axle breaks, it's the same one as a Hilux, they can do something for you and get you back on the road so you can actually get home. And that's the main thing. Folks, you notice that the modifications in this car are literally half what you see some off-roading trucks that you will see out there that serve absolutely no purpose. The modifications you've seen here are enough to make this owner spend weeks at a time in the middle of nowhere, sometimes as high as 5 days without replenishments, in the middle of nowhere. Not hour-and-a-half drive, more like halfway across the world in the middle of nowhere. The literal middle of nowhere. This is all you need. It's purposefully planned and it's just beautiful. And I'm so privileged to have the privilege of seeing this truck first. This has actually have been to my side of the world where I come from, but privileged to work on it. The owner trusted us with it and we got it prepped. We got the clutch taken care of. He's going to take care of this ball joint. And life is wonderful. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this Tacoma as much as I have, and I hope you found this video helpful and informative. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.